Okay, we are on Daf Pei Chesamid Beis, towards the bottom of the Omud, and we got up to Disanya. So let's see if we can find the word Disanya. Rabbi Nehemiah Omen. And it's the first word in the line is shel echad. So we're in the wide lines on Pei Chesamid Beis, and we're counting down from the beginning of the wide lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 lines down from the top of the wide lines. Now, we're going to quote Rabbi Nehemiah. Let's just reiterate as a quick review, an overview of why the Gemara quotes Rabbi Nehemiah. And this is to explain the opinion of Shmuel. Shmuel said something, if you recall, that was very vague, and there was a contradiction between one witness who testified that her husband died and Psule Edus, who testified that her husband's still alive and well. And Shmuel says it all boils down to whether or not she contradicts the witnesses, meaning the Psule Edus, and says, no, I know that my husband is gone. He's not coming back. If she says so, then we could rely on the one witness, or perhaps on her say-so. That was a discussion we had at the end of the Shir yesterday with Rashi. And lo tetzeh, if she gets married, we will not bust up her marriage. If, on the other hand, she is shosekes, she doesn't respond to the claim of these psule edus, who are perhaps relatives, and therefore they're disqualified, maybe noshim are psule edus, and she doesn't respond. Her silence is golden, but in this case, it's a very bad golden silence because now in Masechet Yevamot, and the Gemara says that this is based on Rabbi Nehemiah. And Rabbi Nehemiah is going to give credence or credibility, if you will, to Psule Edus, which is a very radical position. And it's only in the light of Rabbi Nehemiah that we can begin to justify why Shmuel would say in the case of shosekes that we don't rely on the testimony of that one aid, but rather we accept the testimony of the Psule Edus in the case of shosekes. Isanya, we learned to the Brisa of Nehemiah Omer Kol Makom Shemina Torah Leid Echad Halach Acharov Deos. Now, I'm going to try to translate Rabbi Nehemiah literally, but trust me, the literal translation doesn't do us justice. We're going to really need what I call a conceptual understanding of Rabbi Nehemiah. But literally, Rabbi Nehemiah is saying that when the Torah relies on the testimony of one single witness, then we count heads. Meaning, if there's any contradiction to that one single witness, then we go after the majority. And now I want to explain Rabbi Nehemiah on a more conceptual, or shall we say up in the air, not just literal, but what does he mean conceptually in terms of classifying evidence? He classifies evidence under two different categories. There's one called edus, and then there's another one called he'emina Torah. He'emina Torah means that really we don't have testimony. We only have one witness. The Torah requires 2 witnesses as a minimum for edus. But we do have another concept of trustability. of relying on someone who has ne'emanus, and in the absence of edus, we can consider him reliable as if it were two edus, but it's not really edus. Why? How do I know it's not two edus? Because we have a concept called rov deos. And rov deos means that if this one single witness is contradicted by psule edus, by others who are not technically qualified to give testimony, there is some sort of a psul that makes them unqualified, that disqualifies them. They can be believed against the Eid Echad with rov deos, which would mean that if we had two, I don't know what to call them, but they're technically called psule edus. We have two psule edus. Let's say two women come in, and they contradict the one aid. Then you and I would have said, well, the aid himself is an aid kosher, and the Torah is saying you can rely on the aid. The two women who are testifying do not have the status of aidim, and therefore we're left just with one aid. Comes along Reb Nechem, and he says, no, we never accepted that one aid elevating him to the status of two aidim. If one person would contradict him, then we would accept his testimony. But if two contradict him, then we have rov deos. And the word deos, which means opinions, is a substitute for edus, because we're not dealing with edus. The Eid Echad is not an aid, or shall we say he is an aid, but he's only one aid. He doesn't qualify to create an entity in halacha called edus, because for that we need a minimum of two. But he does qualify for ne'emanus. Ne'emanus means, this is a good piece of evidence. He's an honest fellow. Why should we question the veracity of what he's telling us? And we'll rely on him. But it's not edus, because one aid, even if he's an aid kosher, is not edus. So he remains in the category of Hemina Torah. But Hemina Torah, unless we have evidence to the contrary, in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, Hemina Torah, the Torah relies on it. And for our purposes, if there were two aided. But the Torah is not going to rely on him if he's being contradicted by other evidence. And in this case, the evidence that came into Beis Din to counter, or shall we say to question, the reliability of the testimony of the aid is psule edus, and that's called rov deos. And the rov deos tips the scale against the Eid Echad. That's the chiddush of Reb Nechem. And if we didn't have this chiddush, this breakthrough, we would not begin to understand Shmuel in the case of Shosekes, when two psulim testify that we know her husband is alive. There he is, we can identify him. And the Eid Echad says, I saw his corpse. He is dead. And in such a case, Shmuel said, if she's confused and she shows seconds, then we will apply the principle of rov deos. And we have two witnesses who are not technically qualified as witnesses, but they are deos. And deos gives us evidence. We have two women or two brothers-in-law, whatever they are, they're psule edus, and they're testifying that he is alive. There he is. And she's confused. Is that him? Is not him? Those two witnesses who are not witnesses, but rather are deos, they form a rov against the Eid Echad who testifies that I saw your husband dead. And as lead on, we go basa rov deos, according to Reb Nechem's breakthrough. And in such a case, in Niseis Tetzah, we have enough evidence. Again, I emphasize the word evidence because we're not talking about edus. We're psule edus, but it's evidence strong enough to create rov deos that her husband is alive and well. And therefore, we're going to bust up her marriage with the second. That's in the case of Shosek. What changes in the case of Makcheshes, where she tells the two ladies or the two brothers-in-law, whatever the psulim are, that they are off base, they are totally wrong. That is not my husband. That we're going to have to analyze. But at least in the case of Shosekes, when she doesn't contradict these two psulei edus, we begin to understand Shmuel's position of imnises teitze based on the principle of Rav Nachman. Ve'asu shtei noshim be'ish echad, if two women contradict one man, kishnei anoshim be'ish echad, it's like the testimony of two anoshim, meaning it's like it's totally reliable. We will believe two women against one man. Now, why is it that in the case of Masechet, we throw out this whole sophisticated structure of Rav Nachman, which we'll rely on, of Rov Deos? So to understand that, I will read to you something in the Yalkut HaBi'urim. And this is on page Yud Aleph. Now, I don't know, we're a little bit lagging behind, I think, in the photocopies. I think the last was 8, now we're on 11. He says something which we'll have to work out together because I found it very strange. Ha'isha to'enes bari she'ena baila. Against these two ladies who say, there's your husband standing a few feet away, she says, I know that's not my husband. Oz, ein hapsulim nemanim, those two ladies will not be believed. Neged ha'isha to'enes bari, that's the case of Masechet. Mikevan, this is the tough part, she'adam neman al atzmo, a person is believed vis-a-vis himself, afilu keneged rov deos, which if I understand correctly means you could have 1,000 people who are telling her that's your husband over there, go give him a hug. Well, she's got to wait till she gets a get from her second husband, maybe. And she says, no, that's not my husband. She is believed al atzma keneged rov deos, which could be 1,000 people. But if eina toenes klum, in the case of Shosekes, az nemanos hanoshim apsulos keneged eid echad she'omer meis baila ki azlinan basar rov deos. It's a peloton. This is amazing to me that she's believed on herself. I mean, the entire sugya that we were learning in the beginning of this parak of Yitzhak Rabbah is all based on the laws and the regulations that govern evidence. Do we have evidence? We have one aid, we have two aid, then we have contradictions. Trey. Is there a cheskas eishes ish? Did she create a new chazaka when she got married? All these issues are objective issues. And now Shmuel is introducing a whole new variable into the equation, and that's called Adam al Atzmo. She's got to live with this situation. She's going to marry another man, and she has to live with him knowing that Rov Deos are telling her that her husband's alive. She's believed on herself. Anybody want to take a shot at this? I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, but I'm not happy with them. I'm in a bind. I'm in a sort of the evidence situation. I don't know how to move from the spot here. But I think it goes like this. Objective evidence applies in one of the following circumstances. One, we have edus. 2, we have chazaka. And 3, we have rov. Then you could talk about objective terms and how to juggle contradictory evidence. But at some point, everything blanks out. It's like you have a ketzer, you have an electric short. And all the evidence sort of balances in both directions. Shmuel holds that at that moment in time, we enter into the world of ne'emonos. Ne'emonos means, you know what? The objective evidence doesn't really lead us to any conclusion. We're not definite in any way. So let's find out who should be believed on themselves in a very subjective way. To whom is the isur, the prohibition that's on the table, relevant? Now, again, in the case where she got married to a second husband, he was one of the witnesses who testified that her husband was gone. So as far as Al Atzmo is concerned, he saw the corpse, if you pardon the expression, and therefore he can marry her and remain married to her. He is absolutely convinced that her husband is dead. He saw him dead with his own eyes. But what about her? She does her research, and she clarifies in her mind, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that her husband ain't alive. He's gone. She is now ne'emenes al atzma. Again, this can only be relevant when we have dropped the ball, we have closed the door on the halachas of objective reliability, of edim, of chazaka. We're gone. We've petered out. And now we're talking about deos. These women have the opinion that that's her husband. He looks awfully similar to her husband. But at the end of the day, those women who are testifying, so to speak, are not relevant to the Isa. So if you're in the level of ne'emonos, let's ask the baldavar. Who is the person who has to know whether her husband's alive or not? She's the one. The wife has to know. And then we activate the principle of Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo. The Pele, again, that's why I'm telling you, I still feel I'm missing a piece of the puzzle, is that Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo is always lechumra and not lekula. One exception, that's korban. So, for example, you could tell me that I ate chelev, I can deny it, and I don't have to bring the korban. Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo. But that's because the korban requires ratzon. I have to will the korban, and the Torah says lirtzono. But once we leave that very narrow, circumscribed area called karbanos, then Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo is lechumra. And for example, if Ruvain shechts an animal, and he testifies that it was a perfectly good shechita, Shimon was there, and he testifies that there was a psul. There are 5 categories of psul shechita. Shimon is not allowed to eat the meat because Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo. And even if 1,000 witnesses would testify, he is Ne'eman al Atzmo. But that's only lechumra. Lekula? If the shochet would say that this is treif, I made a mistake, or I couldn't, or I checked the animal afterwards, it's treif, there's a hole in the lungs, and he says, no, I know it's kosher. Did we ever find Adam Ne'eman al Atzmo, lekula, to believe a person to be matir and Isra, let alone an Ashes each situation, of a woman who's been married, and now there are 2 ladies, okay, they're psuliatus, but nevertheless rov deos, according to Rav Nachem. And they are testifying that her husband's alive and well, and she says, no, I know he's gone. And Ne'eman al Atzmo. That's a pill. In the past, we spoke about Tainis Bari and how that breaks up a cheskas eishes ish because isha daiku mitzvah, she's very careful and she does all her research and she concludes that her husband is gone. That's fine. But in this context, it's not so simple because we're talking about Rab Nechemia and we're talking about Rov Deos. And against Rov Deos, the Eid Echad is not believed. So why should she be believed? And all we have on the table is Adam Neman Alatz. Ibai Seiman and the Gemara suggests a different twist, a different approach to Shmuel. Kol Heicha, any situation. The Asa Eid Echad Kosher Meikara. If you had a case of one witness who is always kosher, then we accept his testimony and we upgrade him to the status of 280. Afilu me'ed nashim ke'eid echad. Even if 100 ladies would testify against this one single aid, you got 100 against one, they don't make a dent because that one aid is elevated to the status of 2 aid. And if you like, you can take all 100 lady witnesses and consider them as one single witness. There's no Rov Deos over here. And they cannot disqualify the testimony of the one aid. And therefore, even if, according to this new interpretation of Shmuel, she is Shosekes, she says nothing. Nevertheless, lo teitze, will not break up the second marriage because the first witness is believed like 2 Eidim. He has the status of 2 Eidim. Hacha, the Mayas Kinam says Shmuel, in the case where the wife did not contradict the deos, like the ladies, the psuli edus, lo teitze. I'm sorry, teitze. The mayaskina kigon the asya isha meikara. The original testimony was not of an aid kosher who could be elevated to the status of 2 Eidim, but rather it was a woman who testified that I saw your husband's body. She's not an aid kosher, and she's testifying Mace Baila. And now the wife, relying on the testimony of one woman, went ahead and got married. Now two women come and they testify, there's your husband. He's alive and well. In this scenario, the second pair of ladies, of witnesses who testify that your husband's alive, they are believed against one lady who testified because of Rov Deos. And therefore, once they're believed, then Niseis Teitze, we're going to bust up the second marriage. And Tarza Lid Rabbi Nechemia Hachi, according to this answer, this approach, let's explain Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia Omer Kol Mokom Shemina Torah Leidech and Alach Acharov Deos. When the Torah is going to rely on one witness, we're going to say Halach Acharov Deos. And that means that even if Eidim Psulim are testifying, nevertheless we'll rely on Rov Deos. They're believed. The Asu Shtei Noshim the Isha Achas. Let's say there was one woman and now she's being contradicted by 2 women. Or alternatively, Shnei Noshim Bish Echad. If 2 women, I'm sorry, not only if 2 women contradict 1 woman, but if 2 men contradict 1 man, then we're going to say that the majority rules and they can be machish to one. 2 women can be machish 1 woman. 2 men can be machish 1 man. If 2 women contradict each other, I'm sorry, if 2 women contradict 1 man, then it's kipalga upalgadam. That aid, 1 man, will contradict the 2 women, and in such a case, lo teitze, because we're left in a suffix situation. And even if she's not makcheshes, even though she's silent, lo teitze. Why? Because this is the case of 2 women against 1 man. So if it's 2 women against 1 woman, then in this case, teitze, in a case of shosekes, because she wasn't makrish the 2 women. So the avis of the 2 women stand, and they overwhelm or overpower the testimony of 1 woman. But if we start with 1 man, then we consider that 1 man as 2 men, as 2 witnesses, and the 2 women against Adim are not going to be believed, and it's lo case. But not only that, there's another chiddush over here, and that is that the aid is only 1 man, and there are 2 women testifying against the 1 man. We're not going to apply the principle of rov deos and accept the testimony of the 2 women and niseis teitze, even if she's not makcheshes, because we're going to rely, and she is allowed to rely, on the testimony of 1 witness who testified meis baila, because the Torah believed him like 2 witnesses. And that's what it means when Reb Nechemia says, Kol mokom shamina Torah leid echad harekan shnayim. Harekan shnayim means that we will not apply rov deos against 1 aid. This is a radical departure from the previous understanding of Reb Nechemia, where rov deos who believed against 1 aid, even though he's an aid kosher, and the 2 ladies will completely overwhelm, unless you have makcheshes. But in the absence of makcheshes, then we rely on the 2 women against 1 man. Now the Gemara is completely reversing its opinion, and according to the new formulation, Reb Nechemia will elevate the status of 1 aid kosher to that of 2 witnesses, and there's no rov deos over here. And therefore, even if she is shosekes, we will not rely on the testimony of the 2 ladies, because they're contradicting 2 men, even though there's only 1 man. But Reb Nechemia elevated that 1 man to the status of 2 witnesses. And therefore, in this case, lo teitze.